Claire is the president of the Healthcare Financial Management Association and also executive financial director of Cheshire Merseyside Integrated Care Board, and is talking from the CFO perspective on challenges and solutions to maximise value and improve productivity. So Claire, can I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Mark. Hello everyone, my name is Claire Wilson and I'm the Finance Director, as Mark said, of Cheshire Merseyside Integrated Care Board. And this year I've taken on the role of President of HFMA Management Association. And I'm going to first of all provide some context into what I see as the productivity challenges we're facing in the NHS. But also I'd like to describe where I believe some of our focus needs to be and where the areas of opportunity are and how we're approaching this in Cheshire Merseyside. And then finally, I'm going to mention some of the work that HFMA are doing to support finance staff in rising to these challenges. So my first slide, please. So some of the financial context. We talk a lot about the impact of the pandemic on the financial position in the NHS, and it is true that we've seen some fundamental shifts on several fronts. We had a temporary funding regime during that period with changed incentives. We had a lot of non-recurrent funded that was invested recurrently, and we had changing clinical practice and some reduced clinical risk appetite, arguably, and certainly seen an increase in patient acuity subsequent to the pandemic ending. But we saw some other changes too, and in my opinion, there has been a fairly dramatic shift really between a disconnect in the professions that wasn't there immediately before. So finance and clinical colleagues have become slightly more siloed in their own professional priorities than we had previously, and that's for very good reason. Over the pandemic, the priorities were very clear to us all, but we've worked hard in the past on this concept of unitary boards and joint responsibility for joint objectives, and had a really strong clinical and financial engagement across the NHS, and I think we have lost some of that, and I'd like to come back to that later. But it is critical in this conversation of value that those professions are absolutely joined at the hip. So the other things on this slide are fairly well understood. The operational challenges we're facing as we recover on elective activity, more recently the industrial action, and the macroeconomic context that we are operating within. But the new statutory infrastructure and changes to accountability that came into being 2 years ago also added to the complexities of what we are dealing with. But I would argue that these changes have brought with them some really great opportunities to drive value, and I'd like to cover that a little bit later. But by far, I think the biggest part of this challenge is the speed at which we need to improve. So we need to make some really deep and sustainable changes for the longer term, but we've also got to balance the need to make progress very quickly, because in year there is an affordability issue, and so the short-term measures will inevitably be needed too. So if I can move on to the next slide, please, where I want to just briefly touch on some of the areas I think we've got some really good opportunities in the NHS. I said earlier that the new integrated care systems are an opportunity, and I genuinely believe that, and I think it's huge. We have new responsibilities now within statute that says we must work collaboratively, but that's not the only reason we're doing it. I think it's quite clear that the answers to all of our collective challenges are only going to be delivered by doing that. And ICSs are being given the opportunity, the means and the incentives to work across organisation boundaries to drive up value with fewer perceived barriers. Or maybe the barriers weren't there before, but the hearts and minds shift has been palpable from my perspective. So for longer term sustainable change, we do need every decision maker within an organisation or within a system to understand the vision and the role they play in driving improvement. And by decision maker, I don't just mean leaders, I mean every member of staff. All of us, regardless of our role, make resource and value decisions on a daily basis. The principles of improvement methodologies can help us to make improvement systematic, and there are lots of different ones to choose from, and it doesn't really matter which one we go with. NHS Impact has recently done some good work and provided some great materials in this area. But to make this work, we need to measure the right things to get people motivated in the right way. Blunt sort of productivity measurements are going to potentially do more harm than good with a workforce that's already under a lot of pressure, where it is felt that that is not understood properly by those that are having the questions around, that are raising the questions on productivity. So the NHS has lots of data, and the only way we're going to engage thoughtfully and meaningfully is to be really clever with how we translate that data into intelligence. And this will be far beyond the things that we've done in the past. So clinical leadership is the next area for opportunity. We've got some absolutely amazing clinical leadership in the NHS, and a really good track record of working together in a multidisciplinary way, and that is going to be critical. In the NHS, we've got a number of clinical leadership structures that are really well embedded within hospitals and within systems, which probably other industries don't have quite the same in terms of their equivalents. So for finance staff, I think that means being more thoughtful in the way that we communicate financial information, value and productivity, and finding ways to motivate people to unlock the right conversations. And as I say, the NHS has been good at this in the past, so I am optimistic. Probably the next thing I was wanting to say really is there are lots of resources out there. I think there are examples of where some really good work is being done up and down the country. And one of the things that we probably need to be better at, and certainly have made some good inroads into, is by sharing the information much more widely, sharing best practice. Everybody's good at something, and there's always something to learn, and there's always an area that you can learn from, and something that you need to improve on. So by harnessing that and working collectively across the whole of the system is definitely an area of an opportunity. So if I could go on to the next slide and just describe a little bit about how we are using value in the way that we're approaching our financial strategy. And you can see there on the slide, we've got 4 pillars and 3 enabling work streams that are being progressed to develop the financial strategy for the Cheshire Merseyside system. So taking modelling and analytics as a sort of a given to understand the nature of the size of the challenge effectively, we are then looking at 3 other areas, or 3 other perspectives on value. So we are recognising in that second column there, supporting value through behaviours and accountability, that there is a really important element to this in the way that systems work together to share risk on driving value in all parts of the system and across all organisations for the benefit of the whole entire population, not just a single organisation. And so we're giving quite a lot of thought to what those behaviours and accountabilities need to be. The next column along there is delivering value through efficiency and productivity. And whilst the final column on transformation is going to be where the really big systematic transformational change is, we do recognise that in the short term, there will be more traditional efficiency and productivity opportunities that we need to progress with, certainly after having a number of years after the pandemic where we didn't, where maybe we lost some of that. And then finally, that 4th pillar, transformation. These are much harder to get at, but much more impactful, and will enable us to deliver longer term financial sustainability into the future. And we have a number of transformational areas that we're progressing with across our system in order to do that. So my next slide is my final slide, and I just want to finish by describing the work that HFMA are doing to support the NHS finance function in addressing some of the issues I've described today. So my presidential theme this year is working as one, and I've made a call to arms to our profession to focus on working as one to support the challenges we face across 3 main perspectives. Working as one across the finance profession. We all work in our own different organisations with our own alternative perspectives, and no one perspective is the right one. By coming together and understanding all the parts that we play across our system is going to get us where we need to be. The second is understanding and working as one across organisations, getting all the right voices in a room to work collectively on our challenges. And finally, working as one across professional boundaries. And this is particularly critical when we're talking about the work that we need to do to find the common narrative, the common measurement, and the common voice amongst our clinical and operational colleagues. So particularly relevant here is also the work that we're doing in the Healthcare Costing for Value Institute, which supports the NHS to improve clinical costing and to champion this multidisciplinary engagement and ultimately to drive value across our patient pathways. So just to summarise, I think the challenges are significant, but I do think that we have some fantastic opportunities available to us. And I think the finance function is in an absolutely pivotal place to make some of the connections that we need to make in order to make value a real driving force across the way that we make change happen in the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. Wonderful optimism and positivity at the end there. Just picking on that theme of working as one, and also you were talking about the need to win the hearts and minds and kind of to get people out of working in silos. We all know most healthcare professionals go into their profession to help people. Often productivity isn't a first thought. I think as a second thought, people often realise that better allocation of the available resources, allows you to help more people. But how do you think the finance function can better engage with clinicians and operational colleagues in hospitals?
I think we need to be more thoughtful on the way that we choose the metrics that we want to focus on, and the way that we. So, I mean, for example, one of the things in Cheshire Merseyside that is having the biggest, probably the single biggest impact on the value that we deliver for not only taxpayers, but the public and our patients and our staff is the problems that we have and the challenges we have in our urgent care system, and the challenges around flow and delays in the urgent care system. And fundamentally, we could start by talking about how much it costs, which is a very costly model, but it's also not a very good experience for patients. It's not a good experience for staff working in that environment. And a much more powerful narrative and a much more powerful metric for us to engage on is some of the things that are much more meaningful directly to the patient, such as the eradication of corridor care. And by using that as a metric, just as an example, we are going to really harness the everybody around the table, and including the finance profession. Most finance colleagues that I know are working in the public sector, are working in health because of the values that they have around the importance of what we do in the NHS. And so that becomes then a much more powerful conversation to align everybody's priorities in the same way.